For 5 years, one name ruled the BeamNG rally scene: Hyku. While players were fighting for fractions of a second, Hyku played an entirely different game. Their driving was precise, while car setups were extreme, even by speedrunning standards. Between 2021 and 2026, Hyku dominated some of the most competitive tracks in the game. This was a 5-year reign that many believed would never end, no matter how many players came for the crown. But in the world of BeamNG speedrunning, even perfection has a shelf life. This is a story of how a 5-year reign collapsed almost overnight, how one controversial tuning setup shattered the most untouchable era in BeamNG rally history, and how JATO finally did what nobody else could: beat the king. Hyku is one of the most recognizable names in BeamNG speedrunning. After nearly 6 years in the community, almost everyone has heard stories about their driving and how unreal it feels. But it wasn't always this extreme. Back in 2021, Hyku started small, with short trials that in present-day BeamNG look straight out of Trackmania. But back then, they felt far more grounded. Skips were still undiscovered, leaderboards were chaotic, and the huge variety of cars meant players were constantly experimenting. It was the perfect environment for someone willing to push the game further than anyone else. Short mixed circuit at industrial site was a very technical trial, at least from a top-down view. Corners upon even more tight corners. But despite that, it became one of the most shortcut-heavy trials of its era, featuring 2 massive cuts capable of saving entire seconds. By the time Hyku arrived, the map was already heavily optimized, largely thanks to Scred, his unreal VVVVV setup and smooth driving style. With a clear goal in mind, the future king had just one real problem left: choosing a vehicle. While BeamNG offered a huge variety of cars, only 2 serious options remained for such a bumpy track: the Sunburst and the FCV Vivas. Both had their strengths and weaknesses, but between the two, Hyku chose the latter. The Vivas had only recently been added to the game, came with huge tuning potential, and most importantly, remained far more stable over bumps and jumps than the Sunburst. And right at the end of 2021, Hyku posted the run. This was a clean drive with one notable feature: the vehicle. Hyku used a near-stock looking FCV Vivas, with the only difference being the addition of nitros. This setup was lacking one essential part of any real speedrunning build: an extreme weight reduction, including fuel. Yet, with clean driving, Hyku managed to set a new world record, almost 3/10 faster than the previous one. A huge part of that came from under-the-hood tuning. Hyku is a mechanic in real life and has years of experience working with baseline setups. And with BeamNG being so grounded in real-world physics, this was a perfect opportunity to put their skills to the test. It didn't take long for Hyku to optimize everything down to the smallest detail, quickly proving why they would become one of the hardest runners to beat in the near future. While most players would stop after setting a new world record, Hyku kept grinding, pushing both their driving and tuning to the absolute limit. They perfected cornering with the lightweight Vivas, heavily relying on a rally technique known as the Scandinavian Flick. The car would begin rotating long before the corner itself, while Hyku simultaneously tapped the brakes, pulled the handbrake and shifted the car's weight in the opposite direction. Momentum would then swing the vehicle perfectly into the turn, and from there it was full throttle. The FCV Vivas in its lightweight form turned out to be almost perfectly suited for this style of driving. Its high-powered all-wheel drive and low center of gravity allowed Hyku to throw the car into corners far more aggressively than most other vehicles. And over time, this technique became one of the defining traits of their driving. 2 months and 10 new world records. This is how long the runner spent on this seemingly easy and completely solved trial. Sub 20 and even sub 19 were done without any significant weight reduction, except fuel. But with running essentially just a frame on wheels, their times plummeted. And on March 7, 2022, Hyku would set a world record that would stand for 4 years, an 18.578 second run. After this first success, many more records would fall to Hyku's persistence. In fact, over the course of 2 years, Hyku would claim close to 50% of all time trials in the game. But among all of the world records, 2 styles of driving would prove to be their favorite: rally and crawl. Crawl was highly technical, with one mistake potentially ending the entire run. However, it lacked the tuning depth Hyku relied on. That missing layer of optimization made it less suited to their perfectionist approach. It was in a rally where this runner would truly become known and feared. During this period, rally speedrunning in BeamNG was still fairly limited. The main go-to stage was Downhill Rally, later renamed Downhill Run, a scenario with a preset car, a competitive leaderboard, and a handful of small skips that slowly shaped the route over time. But for Hyku, the stage was already too optimized, leaving little room for experimentation or creative tuning. Instead of grinding a 3-minute stage without anything interesting in it, they began moving toward rally trials where tuning mattered just as much as driving, and where routes could evolve into something far more extreme. BeamNG features a wide variety of rally-style trials, ranging from muddy off-road routes on the East Coast to sandy runs in Utah and gravel stages in Italy. Each comes with its own challenges, but most importantly, they offer a level of freedom that missions simply don't have. This was Hyku's element. From a myriad of trials, 2 stand out. Both are very similar in premise, both were heavily optimized during the same period, yet each ended very differently. River Rally in Utah and Deforest Stage on the East Coast. While the community was small, there was still competition. Serzari, Fek and Kimorasa, to name a few. Fek was a great tarmac racer. Serzari obliterated every single scenario and loved preset cars. And only Kimorasa had the same skill set as Hyku. Both River Rally and Deforest Stage were to become a full-on battlefield. Deforest Stage came first. This trial was a unique mix of open and narrow sections, asphalt and dirt, hills and deep ditches. In other words, the perfect proving ground for any rally runner. This is where Hyku received the first real pushback. Their newly set record of 1 minute and 5.7 seconds, while not perfect, was beaten in 10 days by 7th choice. And that led to Hyku getting competitive. Not only did they reclaim the record by nearly 2 full seconds, but over the next 4 months, Hyku would go on to beat their own time 5 more times, eventually setting a ridiculous 1.01 run. Over the next 4 months, the meta around this trial would evolve rapidly. New setups, new ideas, and even entirely different vehicles would force Hyku to rethink their approach. But for now, it was Kimorasa's turn. He was one of the few runners capable of matching Hyku outright, and he even managed to improve the FCV itself by adding a spoiler. As it turns out, a massive increase in downforce was far more valuable than simply removing another 34 kilos of weight. With this, Kimorasa set a new record of 1 minute and 0.88 seconds, and the game was on. Right at the same time, a new vehicle was added, and it was about to change literally everything. La Civietta Scintilla. After a brief delay, Hyku returned with a setup that goes against everything logical: Rally Supercar. This creation took several months of non-stop trial and error, but in the end, it was done. In 2 months, Hyku would take the record and then improve the time by more than a second, breaking the 1 minute barrier. But this was hard. Every corner for Scintilla was a challenge, inertia drifts didn't help much, and so Hyku focused on pure precision. Unlike the Vivas, the Scintilla couldn't absorb bumps nearly as well, meaning every small jump threatened to throw the car completely off balance. At these speeds, there was no time to react normally. You had to predict every bounce before it even happened, constantly correcting the car both on the straights and while sliding through the corners at almost full throttle. There was one upside. The Scintilla is oversteering. Combined with aggressive suspension, it let the car rotate far harder into the turn, turning what should have been an uncontrollable slide into ridiculous corner speed. Gear choice is another point of interest. Hyku stayed in 4th gear almost every corner to keep the turbo fully spooled and maintain enough wheel spin to rotate the car without completely losing traction. While Kimurasa was not far back and even managed to take Hyku by surprise with setting a sub-59 run and 2 days later improving it to almost 58.1, this was the beginning of the end. Kimurasa's Scintilla setup was simply weaker, and in the next 2 weeks Hyku would retake the record and break it 4 more times, setting a new, untouchable low of 57.2 seconds. A record that would stay for almost 3 years. Around the same time, Hyku started grinding another trial, River Rally. This stage had a different meaning to them. This was the rally stage that brought them into the speedrunning scene in the first place, all thanks to Scratch and his excellent record, which didn't stand a chance against the persistence of Hyku. They completely obliterated the previous record. While the very first run was only 1/10 ahead, in the next 2 weeks the time would drop by 2 full seconds. At this time, they were using the typical Vivas setup, with a clear set of problems. Not enough power to skip across the water sections, suspension that loved sending the car flying, and the biggest one, overheating oil and coolant, both of which started burning at the end of the race. After improving both his driving and the Vivas setup, Hyku set a record that would stand for almost 3 months, a 1 minute 30.3 seconds. But this time around, roles would be reversed, because Kimurasa decided to go for the same locked-in mentality and set 5 new records in the span of 30 days. While in Deforest Stage, newly introduced Scintilla helped Hyku make a crazy push, this route was different. It was harsher, with small, sticking rocks. Scintilla's skid plate would catch on them with predictable results, and since Kimurasa's FCV setup was better in every aspect, Hyku decided to retreat. This was the first loss, one of the earliest and yet not as painful as the ones that would follow. In the next 3 years, almost nothing would change. Hyku steadily became more and more aggressive with the runs, eventually becoming the biggest record holder in the entire scene. At one point, they held more than 60 different time trial and scenario records simultaneously. Very few players even dared to challenge them, knowing that defeat was practically guaranteed. But eventually, a few new names began to rise up to the challenge. One of them was Vulp the Philosopher, who, with his own take on the Hyku's Scintilla, managed to take several records and battle the king for quite some time. Over the span of 2024, Vulp and Hyku would fight for control of the Trackmania-style track editor tracks, and Vulp would eventually claim many records, shaking Hyku's domination significantly. However, among the chaos, the rally stages and many crawls stood firm, untouchable and unbeatable. But eventually everything changed with the dreaded .33 update, Hole the Harvest. Like most major BeamNG updates, it brought the usual fixes, map additions and new content, including one vehicle that would completely reshape speedrunning as a whole, the Gavril MD series. This was the very first regular-sized vehicle with jet-assisted takeoff, or JATO for short. Before, this piece of equipment was allowed only on buses and Gavril T series, both of which were suboptimal choices for any real speedruns, unless of course they were the only choice. However, the MD series was much smaller and more agile, at least compared to buses or larger trucks. It took the speedrunning community 5 whole months to realize the potential of the JATO MD series, and even longer to perfect it. But even after all of this, the MD series, even its JATO and the pure wheelbase frame, was still too bulky. Not great for corners or longer trials. While several records fell, it didn't amount to much, and slowly but surely everyone began forgetting about this vehicle, until someone discovered that the JATO was silently added to the Gavril D series. This vehicle, while still bulky, was leagues ahead of any other option. Less weight, more tuning potential, and most importantly, a new base to experiment with. There was only one major drawback – fuel capacity. While the jet itself was similar in power to the MD series variant, it only had 12 seconds of fuel compared to 20, significantly limiting where it could be used effectively. After the initial shock, the community quickly got to work, with Wolf the Philosopher and Era Gaming pioneering the new setup to great success. Many shorter trials fell almost instantly, most of which were previously held by none other than Hyku. One of them was short mixed circuit, where Hyku had held the record for nearly 4 years. The JATO setup took it down with almost 3 seconds to spare after some back and forth between Wolf and Eric. It could almost ignore traditional racing lines entirely, relying on instant acceleration through corners, something the normal vehicles simply couldn't compete with. This was the very first time Hyku and many other speedrunners raised the question of separating JATO and non-JATO runs, a change that ultimately never happened. The main reason was the community size. Creating nearly 150 new empty categories would have artificially inflated the number of trials. Even so, Hyku still held several rally stages that this setup simply couldn't break. They were too long, too technical, and had too many corners for such a limited amount of fuel. But BeamNG speedrunners are well known for their ingenuity. One of the runners, Scrat, a former holder of multiple rally records, proposed a new concept, combining both the engine and JATO on the D series hull. In practice, the engine would not survive for long, roughly 2 minutes under ideal conditions, with careful throttle control and minimal JATO use. But that was more than enough. JATO was used to build up speed instantly, while the engine maintained it once the boost ended. A simple but devastatingly effective combination. Corners were taken aggressively, while bumps were a problem only on paper. Between the truck suspension and downforce from the JATO itself, this vehicle managed to almost floor in any rally stage. And so, unbeatable records started falling. Deforest Stage was crushed by 1.5 seconds. Scintilla, thanks to a lot of corners, was almost on pace with the D series. But the very last kilometer sealed the fate of this rally stage. The same happened to River Rally, but by an even bigger margin. Almost 3 seconds were shaved. But this was just the start. Over the following year, more and more records would fall. Months of optimization were erased almost overnight by a single new meta. What happened next divided the entire community. Many saw it as a natural evolution, similar to when Scintilla took hold in 2022 and outperformed almost all competition. Others saw it as a problem. For the first time in BeamNG history, records were taken by half-map jumps and suboptimal corners. This setup simply bypassed everything the game had been built on for years. Driving became secondary, tuning became minimal, and the entire question of optimization was replaced with a simple answer: just use JATO. Some people adopted immediately, chasing the new meta. Both Era Gaming and Wolf the Philosopher embraced it fully, updating their runs. Others stepped away entirely, unwilling to compete in a game that no longer rewarded what they had spent years mastering. Among those who left was Hyku. They hated the JATO meta and decided to quit speedrunning altogether. Even now, some of their records stand tall, a grim reminder of the ages past, a shadow of the former king that still prevails, even after all this time. So if you think you have what it takes, there are still a few crowns left to claim. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Hyku, Wolf, Sipari and many other speedrunners who helped with this video. Don't forget to like, comment and consider subscribing. I am Molten Metal Mayhem and I'll see you next time.